What does marriage really bring to a woman? These three wealthy women of noble birth were all inexplicably disliked by their in-laws after marriage, on top of their husbands' constant affairs, leaving the three noble ladies pouring out their grievances at a ball. Suddenly, their gazes shifted to the young and beautiful Grand Duchess. With thinly veiled schadenfreude, they asked, "Your mother-in-law treats you well, doesn't she? And the Grand Duke still as cold as ever? Oh, and his sister doesn't seem easy to get along with either, does she?" Under the sympathetic looks of the three ladies, Parasati was about to explain, when a hand suddenly reached for her slender waist. The so-called ice-cold Grand Duke actually pulled his wife into an intimate embrace in full public view. The three ladies were so shocked their jaws nearly dropped, and they hurriedly bowed to the Grand Duke. But the man ignored them completely and said tenderly to his wife, "I've been looking for you everywhere, and if I can't see you even for a moment, I start to feel uneasy. Can't you just stay by my side?" Embarrassed by the public display of affection, Parasati gave him no face at all and shoved away his handsome face as he leaned in for a kiss. Right then, a small, childish voice chimed in to compete for attention. "Mom already said she's not feeling well, why haven't you let go yet?" Another displeased, low female voice cut in, "Exactly. Do you have any sense of propriety at all?" With that, the elder sister-in-law joined in, and the three of them tightly hugged Parasati, leaving her struggling to catch her breath. Just as she was about to raise her hand in protest, her uncle appeared carrying Ailey, who fussed and demanded a hug as well. One after another, people holding children joined the group hug, and the crowd broke into chatter as the scene quickly turned noisy. The woman of the highest status at the gathering, the Duke's wife, Parasati's mother-in-law, noticed the commotion and said coldly, "Who is making all this noise?" Under the worried gazes of the onlookers, she walked with authority toward the instigator, her own daughter-in-law. But in the very next second, her action shocked everyone. The formidable mother-in-law actually bowed to her daughter-in-law. "Do you want our family's land or our mines? I told you before you saved our family. Whatever you want, I will grant it." Parasati waved her hands in embarrassment to refuse, but her mother-in-law only smiled even wider. "That if you keep refusing, then I'll give you all our property." In an instant, the entire ballroom burst into applause for Parasati, offering her their sincerest admiration. Being able to conquer the famous ice house was truly impressive. Yet Parasati herself looked utterly resigned. Being overly cherished by one's in-laws could be quite a headache. Before the wedding, the fiancé spoke to the bedridden woman, "You're about to die. I did this so I can inherit your family's estate." The woman struggled desperately, crying out for help, finally drawing the stepmother and the younger sister. But the stepmother, who had once cared for her so devotedly after her parents' deaths, showed a smug smile. "You're finally going to die. Blame your father for leaving you no way out. If he hadn't made you inherit everything, we could have been such a close mother and daughter." The stepsister's laughter was shrill. "Mother, are we going to become rich now?" Amid Parasati's hatred that threatened to tear her eyes apart, the fiancé walked over to the sister and pulled her tightly into his arms. "Of course, my little princess." The stepmother, the stepsister, and the fiancé stood together as if they were the real family. The vicious stepmother picked up a pillow. "Will make good use of your inheritance. Just die in peace." Amid Parasati's terrified screams, the teasing laughter of her sister and fiancé chode not far away, dripping with mockery. "I end the final second of her life," she swore in her heart. "I will never forgive you. Even in death, I will never forget you." Perhaps it was this hatred so intense that even death itself would respect it that brought Parasati back to life. Yes, exactly what you're seeing. Transmigration and rebirth. After confirming the point in time to which she had returned, Parasati did not dwell on the reason for her rebirth. She only knew she could not afford to waste this second chance. As a count's daughter, she had to protect her own life as well as the inheritance her father had left her. She soon realized a harsh truth: simply rejecting the scumbag's proposal was far from enough. She needed a proper excuse to completely sever ties with that shameless man. Moreover, although her father's will stated that all of the count's lands belonged to her, she had never managed an estate before. How was she supposed to defend those territories? Most importantly, no one could guarantee that she would not be targeted again by her stepmother, stepsister, and fiancé, especially when she did not even know how she had been murdered in the first place. Before she could truly protect herself, Parasati had to secure her own safety to the greatest extent possible. She had assumed the man before her was incapable, just as the rumors claimed, which was why she rushed to propose to him. After all, she only needed a nominal husband to inherit her estate. Being useless in that regard would actually be perfect. She could even keep him as a kept man. Yet at that very moment the Grand Duke pressed his future wife instead. "What benefit do I get from marrying you?" Parasati pinched her palm, forcing her trembling body to calm down. "My family is trying to kill me and take the inheritance that rightfully belongs to me. If I marry you, I can escape their control." A deep look of disdain appeared on the Grand Duke's face. "And what does any of that have to do with me?" He immediately ordered her to leave. Driven by the desperate need to survive, Parasati ignored all propriety and grabbed the Grand Duke's bare hand, the one without a glove. The man's pupils shrank in an instant. He flung her away harshly, but the ring on the girl's finger sliced open his palm, and his blood splattered onto Parasati at once. The girl scrambled to her feet and apologized in panic. Yet the Grand Duke only grew angrier. He looked at her sideways and said coldly, "I have no intention of wasting more time talking to you. Leave, miss." But Parasati was a heroine who had lived 2 lifetimes. How could she possibly let such a crucial piece go now? Calmly, she called out to the Grand Duke. "You need a wife right now, don't you? As far as I know, His Majesty is planning to marry a princess to you. And that princess, if I remember correctly, is only 12 years old, and she especially hates older men." Such a classified matter being known by an outsider, the Grand Duke stared at Parasati with the gaze he reserved for the dead. Under that crushing pressure, the girl did not retreat. She patted her chest confidently. "My lord, you need me. Just 1 year. After 1 year we divorce immediately." The only answer Parasati received was silence. Anxiety crept in and she unconsciously began biting her nails. "If this plan fails, what will I do next?" She thought that I absolutely can't let my stepmother notice what I'm doing. As the girl's thoughts spiraled, the Grand Duke finally gave his answer. "The king is forcing me to marry the 4th princess, not the underage 7th princess. And I don't have much patience. Don't make me repeat myself." Parasati watched helplessly as the Grand Duke walked away, despair and resentment surging through her chest. Just as she reached out to stop him, a wave of dizziness struck and she collapsed to the ground. The pain of hovering on the brink of death felt exactly the same as in her previous life. In the instant before she lost consciousness, she saw the Grand Duke rushing toward her in alarm. Staring at Parasati, who seemed to have come back from the dead in the pit, the Grand Duke murmured, "How can she still be alive? Anyone who comes into contact with my blood should die from the poison." His thoughts in chaos, the Grand Duke immediately reached out a hand to the dirt-covered Parasati. "You don't want to be buried alive for real. Get out of that pit first." Only then did Parasati realize he hadn't intended to bury her at all. Then why had she fainted? Back at the Grand Duke's residence, the girl confronted him angrily. "Were you trying to kill me earlier?" The man ignored the question. "You were biting your finger just now. Is that a habit of yours?" Seeing the confusion on her face, the Grand Duke removed his glove and explained, "See this wound? You cut it when you grabbed my hand earlier." Parasati still didn't understand. "What does that have to do with burying me alive?" A barely perceptible smile appeared on the man's lips. "Perhaps I should seriously consider your proposal." When the girl continued pressing him about why she had nearly been buried alive, the Grand Duke simply took out a fountain pen and sliced open his own palm to prove it. Then, before Parasati's stunned eyes, the Grand Duke fed her his own blood. In his blood-red, predatory eyes, a trace of apology surfaced. "This is too important that I need to test it one more time." Before Parasati could ask anything, the man pressed his still-bleeding palm firmly over her face. The Grand Duke's blood sent her heart into a frenzy, pounding wildly. In the end, she lost consciousness and collapsed to the ground. Fortunately, Parasati revived once more, gasping for air like a fish thrown onto land. When she saw the Grand Duke before her, she couldn't help but scream. A murderer who had killed her twice already, she needed to stay as far away from him as possible. Her stepmother had thought she was nothing more than a fragile white lotus, easy to devour along with her vast inheritance. Instead, the girl quietly made a decisive move and proposed to the Grand Duke herself. Under her stepmother's gaze of envy, jealousy, and resentment, she rose to become the lofty Grand Duchess. The vicious woman still tried to discipline her in the name of being a mother. The girl, however, directly revoked their right of residence. Before her father's grave, Parasati said coldly, "I've decided to appoint my uncle as the administrator of my inheritance. Therefore, mother and sister, the 2 of you may no longer live in the main residence. And I will not allow any outsiders to step foot in the Count's estate. Understood?" Parasati looked coldly at her former fiancé and said flatly, "By outsiders, I meant you." They had taken her for a fool, truly believing she didn't know her fiancé had long been secretly involved with her sister. Turning away, Parasati left those scheming family members behind. As for her former fiancé, he was nothing more than an ordinary knight. And now that their engagement was broken, he also lost his qualification to take the Royal Knight Order examination, an exam open only to nobles. She let out a dark chuckle. This was only the beginning. From now on, that scumbag would lose more and more. After venting her anger, Parasati hurried back to the Grand Duke's residence to prepare for the wedding. That cold, aloof man had decided to marry her just 3 days after her proposal, and the wedding itself was extravagantly grand. Under the witness of all, Parasati smoothly ascended to become the lofty Grand Duchess. Once she shed the overly ornate gown, she finally relaxed, thinking that before stripping her former fiancé off everything, she had nearly been exhausted to death herself. Still, when she recalled the magnificent wedding, almost every noble present had worn an expression of doubt. Parasati didn't need much thought to understand why. In their eyes, the Grand Duke had married her merely to avoid a political marriage with a princess. They were convinced there had to be some hidden exchange of interests between her and the Grand Duke. At the ceremony, he would rather converse with others than offer his arm to his bride. As if he had no intention of concealing the true reason behind the marriage. Parasati sighed in relief. Thankfully, it was only a contract marriage. That if it were real, she would have ended up depressed. Unexpectedly, the Grand Duke was quite satisfied with her and even proposed extending the term of their contractual marriage on the very first day after the wedding. Parasati rolled her eyes at once. In her heart she thought, absolutely not. But as an adult she still smiled and replied, "Let me think about it." On the very first day after the girl married the Grand Duke, another woman openly confessed her love to him, and she was a highborn princess. The Grand Duke, however, remained as cold as ever. The princess clenched the umbrella in her hand and demanded, "Did you really abandon me to marry another woman? Do you think anyone could love you more than I do?" Under the sympathetic gazes of the onlookers, Parasati found herself painfully awkward. Seeing the hysterical fervor on the princess's face, Parasati felt it was such a waste. There were plenty of men in the world, so why obsess over an iceberg like him? As for herself, it was only a contract marriage. She saw the Grand Duke as nothing more than a tool to secure her inheritance. To her horror, she accidentally voiced that thought aloud. This instantly irritated the princess. In the middle of her confession, gripping the sharp handle of her umbrella, the princess advanced step by step toward the girl who had stolen her place. "You shouldn't be standing by the Grand Duke's side." As the spectacle of two women fighting over one man grew increasingly absurd, someone finally stepped in to stop it from spiraling further. A woman with fiery red hair stepped forward, her manners graceful. "Greetings, Your Highness." That said, the crowd is getting larger and larger. "Your Highness, who would have thought you'd covet a man who just got married? You don't mind letting everyone see you like this, do you?" The red-haired woman spoke with a smile, yet her words were razor-sharp, earning Parasati's quiet admiration. Seeing the princess left speechless, the Grand Duke took the opportunity to bow politely to her. Watching the man she loved walk away with his wife in his arms, the princess clenched her teeth and threatened, "One day, you'll realize that I'm the one you truly need. If the two of us aren't together, then no one will ever be happy." That overwhelming confidence made Parasati glance back at her, thinking to herself, "So you really do love the Grand Duke that much, Your Highness? Don't worry that I won't touch him at all. You only need to wait 1 year." After boarding the carriage for home, Parasati thanked the woman who had just stepped in to defuse the situation. The Grand Duke introduced her with a blank expression that "She's my sister." Parasati instantly grew tense, stumbling even through her self-introduction. The elder sister-in-law cut her off directly. "Why did you marry my brother?" The origin and course of their contract marriage flashed through Parasati's mind. She froze, unsure how to answer. Fortunately, the Grand Duke spoke up coldly. "Didn't I already tell you? It was love at first sight." They had known each other for only 3 days before he rushed into marriage. Even if he claimed it was love at first sight, his sister clearly didn't believe it. A vein throbbed on her beautiful face in anger. "Anyone would think you married casually just to avoid marrying the princess, and that will only turn the family into a laughingstock." Her accusation left the Grand Duke momentarily without a rebuttal, and the carriage fell into silence. Sitting to the side, Parasati felt unbearably awkward, like an innocent bystander caught in the fallout of someone else's disaster. She pressed her lips together and glanced at her husband, thinking, say something already. The oppressive atmosphere made her want to do something, anything. Suddenly, Parasati noticed that whether it was the Grand Duke or his sister, members of the Lappy family were dressed unusually conservatively. Under the siblings' puzzled gazes, Parasati cracked open the carriage window to get some air. At that moment, the carriage jolted. Losing her balance, Parasati grabbed the window frame in panic. But her hair was swept up by the wind and slapped squarely across the Grand Duke's face, his first ever experience of being quite literally slapped in the face. The Grand Duke quickly covered his face with his hand. That only made Parasati even more nervous, and she hurriedly apologized. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Seeing her brother angry yet unable to vent it, the sister sitting beside them laughed until tears welled up. Dio, to think you'd ever end up this disheveled. Especially after seeing her brother's face reddened and swollen from the lash of hair. She laughed so hard she collapsed back into her seat, instantly dissolving the earlier tension. Only Parasati remained flustered and at a loss. The sister's laughter bloomed like a vivid rose, leaving Parasati momentarily dazed. Wiping away her tears of laughter, she said, brother, your current wife is quite interesting. Parasati alone felt like crying thankfully. The two hadn't started arguing. What a relief, even if she hadn't meant to be interesting. In her previous life, the heroine had been murdered by her fiancé. After her rebirth, she wasted no time. She immediately broke off the engagement and quietly maneuvered to revoke his eligibility for the Royal Knight Order examination. She then married the lofty Grand Duke. Yet the scumbag refused to give up his premium meal ticket and showed up at the Grand Duke's estate on the very first day after Parasati's wedding. From dawn until dusk. His dramatic confession infuriated the Grand Duke's son, Parasati's stepson. This is no place for a mere knight like you. But the scumbag ignored the heir of the household entirely, rudely striding past him toward the estate. Yeah, it's Schiff. Come out and see me. In truth, the Grand Duke's son felt little attachment to his stepmother, but he could not tolerate being disregarded like this. His body trembled with anger, and he angrily drew the sword from a nearby guard. Striding forward, if you won't heed the warning and are so eager to die, then I'll grant your wish. You have insulted the Lapillion family. This is the punishment you deserve. In the very next second, a large hand seized him forcefully. The Grand Duke stopped him with a darkened expression. Schiff, however, looked delighted as he spotted Parasati stepping down from the carriage, calling her by her intimate nickname with feigned affection. Parasati glared at her former fiancé, thinking, is this two-timing jerk doing this on purpose? She shouted in front of everyone, I already told you I don't love you anymore. The scumbag was about to accuse Parasati of being shallow and chasing wealth, but the Grand Duke's terrifying red eyes glared at him from the shadows, robbing him of the courage to utter a single word. In the end, the two-faced man clenched his fists and put on a show of devotion. Before the upcoming celebration, the regular Night Corps will hold a parade. I'll be participating as well. Come watch. The girl had no idea how to respond to such shamelessness. At that moment, the Grand Duke frowned as he looked him over. Even I can't stand listening to this. Are you saying you don't even want to keep the title of ordinary knight? Take him away. Then he turned to his visibly awkward new wife. The one you said tried to kill you earlier, was it him? After receiving Parasati's affirmative answer, a sharp glint flashed in the Grand Duke's eyes. Good, that I'll remember him. However, when dinner came, the adorable stepson, Us, did not appear. As his stepmother, Parasati couldn't help but feel worried. She took the meal prepared by the maid and directly pushed open the door to Us' room. The tsundere little boy shouted angrily, who dares open the door without my permission? He secretly lifted the edge of the blanket and realized it was Parasati. Parasati greeted him warmly, but received only a cold reply. You came here just to please the Grand Duke, didn't you? The boy let out a mischievous laugh. A man just confessed to you in front of my father. If that were me, I'd be too embarrassed to even come in. Parasati found herself unable to refute him, and an awkward silence filled the room. Suddenly, she noticed the tear marks still lingering on Us' face. It seemed the soft little boy was only pretending to be strong. She reached out, wanting to pat his head, but the boy slapped her hand away with a sharp smack. Us trembled like a startled cat with its fur standing on end, then suddenly grabbed the hem of Parasati's dress and pushed her out of the bedroom. His cute little face looked utterly lifeless. The moment the door closed, he said coldly, please don't care about me anymore. Standing outside, Parasati pondered to herself, had this child entered puberty early, Why was his mood so unpredictable? All of a sudden, the head maid appeared before her. Your Grace, you're here. Tonight, you are to consummate the marriage with the Grand Duke. The bath has been prepared. Please bathe and change. Parasati panicked instantly. This was supposed to be a contract marriage. No one had said anything about becoming a real couple. She instinctively chewed on her fingernail, anxiety surging. With so many rooms in the house, wouldn't it be better to suggest sleeping separately? Just then, the door burst open with a loud bang. The Grand Duke suddenly appeared before her, dressed in a robe. Sweating nervously, the girl quickly covered her eyes and dashed toward the door. But in the next second, the man was already right behind her. Where do you think you're going? After the door was locked, the man calmly set aside his robe. Faced with him at such close range, the girl covered her eyes in embarrassment. The man, however, stopped teasing her. He adjusted his clothes and explained evenly, if we sleep separately now, it'll raise suspicion. If rumors spread that we've already consummated the marriage, it will dispel doubts. And during the marriage, we must share the same room. Parasati's eyes widened. Was this some kind of test of her self-control? Seeing the Grand Duke completely covered up, even wearing gloves to bed. A trace of regret flickered through Parasati's heart. Lying in the same bed with a man like this, she found it impossible to fall asleep. The Grand Duke seemed to sense that she was still awake and spoke up. My sister seems to be quite satisfied with you. Originally, the title of Grand Duke should have been hers. But because of our family's curse, anyone who comes into contact with our blood is poisoned to death. She lost all her family because of it and fell into madness. At that time, she was no longer capable of handling affairs. So she voluntarily gave up the title. For more than a year after that, she refused to see anyone. Recalling that chaotic period of his sister's life, the Grand Duke let out a deep sigh. Fortunately, she has finally come out of it. For some reason, these casual, almost domestic words sent a warm current through Parasati's heart. If they were truly husband and wife, this was probably how they would talk about family in bed. Accompanied by the man's low, steady voice, Parasati felt her anxiety fade, her eyelids growing heavier and heavier. Yet that night she still dreamed of her past life. The stepmother who poisoned her and the former fiancé coveted her inheritance. Parasati jolted awake from the nightmare. Trembling like a startled little squirrel, her nerves still on edge. The Grand Duke immediately pulled her into his arms, gently patting her back to comfort her. The commotion inside the room drew the steward outside, and he burst in with imposing momentum. Something really has happened to your grace. What on earth occurred while I was gone? The scene before him left him stunned, as the two were locked tightly in each other's arms. The maids, quick to read the room, immediately shut the door. The force of it sent them bumping straight into us, the Grand Duke's son standing outside. Still half asleep, Parasati was thrown into confusion by that restless hand, and ended up throwing a solid punch at the Grand Duke's handsome face. Even more surprising was that the usually unforgiving Grand Duke didn't retaliate. When the steward noticed the mark on his face, the Grand Duke even covered for her. I ran into a cabinet. At the same time, he sighed inwardly. So annoying, my wife punched me and I can't even scold her. Seated at the dining table, the Grand Duchess was overwhelmed with guilt. Ever since marrying into the estate, she seemed to bring trouble wherever she went. Parasati didn't even dare look at the Grand Duke's face. Just as she avoided his gaze, the man waved his hand and announced coldly, "Prepare a carriage. Us would be sent back to the countryside today." Though the boy bore the Grand Duke's name, he was in fact the child of the Grand Duke's elder brother. Trained as an heir, Us had been disciplined strictly, while the depth of his longing for affection after losing his parents had gone unnoticed. With reddened eyes, Us apologized softly. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have come back on my own. But, could I stay here? I promise I'll behave. Yesterday I didn't truly mean to kill that night." Suddenly, the Grand Duke rose to his feet. The shrill scrape of the chair against the floor cut off Us' explanation. "If you had been injured because of last night's actions, our family's secret might have been exposed. If you are sincerely repentant, then you should go." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Us knew better than anyone that no one had ever changed the Grand Duke's decisions. Lowering his head, he left in dejection. Parasati couldn't help but speak up for the poor child. "He didn't even eat properly last night. Can't this wait until after he's had dinner?" Hearing this, the steward suddenly felt that someone normal had finally entered this cold household. He abandoned his former opposition to the Grand Duke taking a wife and instead offered Parasati the highest, most formal bow. That gentle yet respectful smile made Parasati blush despite herself. Those with unhappy childhoods often spend a lifetime trying to heal. The boy had believed that after losing his parents, being taken in by his uncle would mean receiving even more love. Instead, his uncle became colder than ever, treating him with the harsh standards of a family heir. That US felt deeply wronged. He wanted to stay by his uncle's side, yet was repeatedly sent farther away. In anger, he threw things around his room to vent, accidentally cutting his own hand. The maids were helpless, unable to bandage him, because US blood was highly toxic. Anyone who touched it would collapse instantly. Normally, the only person who could tend to US wounds was the Grand Duke himself, but he had already gone to the palace to meet the king. In this emergency, Parasati, newly wed to the Grand Duke, decided to take the risk and tend to US herself. The moment the door opened, US threw something toward it and shouted in panic, "Don't come in." But it was too late. Carrying the medicine, Parasati was struck on the forehead and blood immediately appeared. US had never intended to hurt anyone. When he realized it was his aunt, guilt and unease surged through him. He froze and asked, Why are you here?" He pressed his lips together, then shouted like a wounded little beast, "Are you looking down on me?" He pulled the blanket over himself, hiding his tear-streaked face. "Didn't I tell you not to come and care about me anymore?" Parasati knew this child was a textbook tsundere, always saying the opposite of what he truly felt. Everything he said had to be understood in reverse. She glanced around the messy room and at the blood US had spilled on the floor, and felt a headache coming on. Parasati gently sat by the bed, patting US through the blanket as she coaxed softly, "I'm not looking down on you. Let me finish bandaging your wound and then I'll leave, okay?" US lifted the blanket, instinctively wanting to run away, but the moment he saw the injury on Parasati's face, he immediately knelt on the bed and blurted out an apology. "I'm sorry. Please don't tell the Grand Duke. He'll definitely send me away. I know I was wrong. I'll be good." Seeing US lower his head, Parasati reached out at once to gently pat his hair and comfort him, then carefully wrapped a bandage around his palm. More than the wound on his hand, which would heal with time, she was worried about US himself. He clearly longed for the Grand Duke's affection, yet the two of them were always at odds. Lowering her voice, she urged him, "If you really don't want to go back to the annex, try talking to the Grand Duke. I'll help you too." Seeing the pitiful, love-starved look on the child's face, Parasati really wanted to hug him, but every time she tried to get closer, US pushed her away. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. "Did I ask it because you think I'm useless and just feel sorry for me?" Parasati's hand paused mid-bandage. The next moment, his words grew even harsher. "If you're only doing this to curry favor with the Grand Duke, then you should stop." I in his eyes, "I'm worthless. You're just wasting your effort." Parasati looked at US helplessly. "The Grand Duke has never said you're worthless. Why do you deny yourself like this?" US grew even more upset. Does he really need to say it out loud? Even the servants know. How could I not? Watching the child slump with a clear "no one loves me" expression, Parasati finally took action. She suddenly pinched US soft cheeks, oddly enjoying how the little troublemaker couldn't fight back at all. Then she said seriously, "If it weren't for you yesterday, would that annoying ex-fiancé of mine have disappeared from my sight? Isn't that your achievement?" US abruptly stopped resisting and buried his face into Parasati's palm, like a black kitten being gently stroked. Parasati continued, "Even if others deny you, you can't keep denying yourself." Her steady gaze made US lift his head to look at her. "Honestly, until yesterday I was just like you, constantly doubting myself. But seeing you now, I suddenly woke up. I think it's time I changed that way of thinking. If hurting yourself came from those thoughts, then don't ever do something so foolish again. Hurting yourself brings you nothing." No one had ever seen through his tantrums to the heart that simply wanted care and attention. US was moved in an instant. For once, he took the initiative to step closer to Parasati and gently reached out to touch the wound on his sister-in-law's forehead. Parasati was about to explain that it didn't hurt, when in the next second, blood suddenly began pouring from her nose. With a thud, amid US panicked cries, Parasati collapsed against the edge of the bed, gasping for air. She forced herself to stay conscious, telling herself she couldn't pass out otherwise she would scare US. In the end, she still lost consciousness under the child's terrified gaze. The man had believed he felt nothing for his contract wife, yet the sight of her lying there, barely breathing, stirred an inexplicable sorrow in his chest. When Parasati slowly came to, the Grand Duke couldn't help but scold her. "Even if the toxin in our family's blood doesn't affect you, you can't be careless. You may not die from my blood, But what if you were poisoned by us? Behind those words was unmistakable concern. Knowing she had indeed been reckless, the girl lowered her head and apologized. I'm sorry, that was my mistake. The Grand Duke then turned to the troublesome child, his tone darkening. Us. You should understand this now, your actions could actually get someone killed. Before the words had fully settled, he saw the child who always pretended to be strong finally show his vulnerability for the first time. Perhaps witnessing his aunt nearly die before his eyes made us realize it at last. If his blood carried such lethal poison, then he should stay as far away as possible from those he cared about. Tears dripped onto the carpet, his eyes red from crying. The boy who had stubbornly refused to return to the countryside now lowered his head and admitted his mistake. I was too immature. I'm willing to go back to the estate. Us wiped away his tears, then turned around and walked off, dejected. That lonely figure struck Parasati straight in the heart. She knew perfectly well that her marriage to the Grand Duke was only a contract, and that she shouldn't interfere in family matters, yet she still reached out and grabbed us by the sleeve. The boy turned back in disbelief, instinctively trying to pull away, only to hear her say with firm resolve, "Didn't you have something you wanted to say to the Grand Duke earlier?" Standing nearby, the Grand Duke was utterly confused that he was about to tell Parasati to take it easy, given her condition, when she suddenly turned on him instead. If a child keeps causing trouble, isn't it because no one ever bothered to teach him properly? Us is still a child, and if he makes a mistake, you can't blame him alone, Parasati said firmly. If anyone is at fault, it's the one who failed to guide him properly. Do you plan to lock us away for the rest of his life and cut him off from the world? The Grand Duke never intended that. He bent down, leaning closer to Parasati, and lowered his voice. No one can guarantee that what happened today won't happen again, and next time you might not survive it. In the end, his decision truly came from concern for her, though Parasati wasn't entirely selfless either. As the two discussed the child's fate in hushed tones, Us watched his aunt defend him without hesitation, and his heart stirred, imitating Parasati. He looked at the Grand Duke with determination. I want to stay here. I promise today's incident will never happen again. His tone was steady, but the cold sweat on his face betrayed his nerves. Facing the man who had always been distant, he added softly, "If you let me stay, I'll keep my head down and won't draw attention." The Grand Duke fell silent for a long while. Parasati muttered on purpose, "Didn't someone say children should have a castle where they can be free?" A murderous glare instantly landed on her. She hurried to backtrack. I was just saying it casually. At last, the man rubbed his forehead and let out a long sigh. Is there anything you still need to retrieve from the estate? The troublesome child had been completely won over by Shasha, turning into a little shadow that followed her everywhere. As the Grand Duchess, Shasha also worked hard to learn how to manage the affairs of the estate, duties that were technically already hers. Yet the Grand Duke's retainers remained distant and lukewarm toward her. Whenever she handled external matters, she still had to mind their expressions and attitudes. Fortunately, after what happened with us, the mild-mannered butler grew much closer to her, and quietly helped her out on many occasions. Since her marriage to the Grand Duke was merely contractual, Shasha often slept on the sofa despite sharing the same room with him, and she had no complaints about it. After all, the sofa in the Grand Duke's residence was even more comfortable than the beds she had slept on before. Feeling the softness beneath her, she thought to herself that sleeping on it for a whole year would be no problem at all. Gradually, things began to take a turn for the better. During the day, Shasha focused on learning and managing affairs. And at night, the nightmares of being smothered to death by her stepmother in her past life grew fewer and fewer. Just as she started to feel as if she had been given a second chance at life, the very family members who once tormented and killed her appeared again, clinging to her like flies. Worried that turning them away would invite gossip, Shasha ultimately allowed them into the residence. She knew all too well why her stepmother and stepsister had come, because she had entrusted her inheritance to her uncle. Since then, the pair could neither live in the main residence nor freely control the family's wealth. With countless eyes watching inside the Grand Duke's estate, Parasati asked cautiously, "Did you come to see me for something?" With a sharp clink, the stepmother slammed her teacup down. Taking advantage of the audience, she launched into her well-practiced performance, retreating to advance. "Parasati, this is all my fault." Pressing a hand to her chest, she sobbed. "After you left last time, I reflected deeply. I admit I didn't care for you enough. Otherwise, how could I have missed it with something else besides your father's death hurting you?" Half covering her tear-streaked face, she continued, "You married the Grand Duke without a word. Your mother, I should at least say a proper farewell. The speech painted Parasati as an unfilial daughter. The girl couldn't bear to listen any longer. She stood up ready to leave. In the next second, the stepmother deliberately spilled the scalding tea onto her own hand. The stepsister cried out on cue, "Sister, what are you doing? Mother, are you all right?" Outside, the servants began whispering, speculating about what had happened inside. With tears in her eyes, the stepmother covered the burn and asked with feigned concern, "Parasati, did the tea splash on you just now?" The girl watched the fragrant spectacle with interest. She waved over a maid and summoned a physician. During the treatment, servants outside murmured among themselves. One sweet-looking maid asked her companion in confusion, "Are nobles always like this? They speak so gracefully, but their expressions..." She hesitated, then shivered as she recalled the scene when receiving the Grand Duchess's family. Their faces had looked chillingly sinister. They seemed less like family and more like enemies. One of the maids nearby clicked her tongue indifferently. "Looks like that rumor is true after all. They say the Grand Duchess kicked her own family out to monopolize the inheritance." The blonde-haired young maid instinctively tried to speak up for Parasati, but another maid cut her off decisively. "And look, she's only just married in, yet she's already interfering in every matter of the Grand Duke's household. Who knows what her real agenda is? Some people even say she seduced the Grand Duke with her looks. Marrying a handsome, wealthy noble should have been a joyous occasion, yet her mother and sister showed no happiness at all, deliberately showing up at her in-laws' residence instead. Driven by jealousy, the sister even blurted out in public, "Sister, since when did you start seeing the Grand Duke?" When Parasati remained silent, her mother immediately launched into her well-honed act. She scolded the younger daughter for her rudeness on the surface, while turning to Parasati with a worried expression. "Lately, there have been some strange rumors outside. Everyone says you drove us out to take your father's inheritance for yourself." Seeing Parasati's expression darken, the stepmother quickly added, "Of course, we know it's all nonsense." Putting on the mask of a considerate mother, she continued, "It's just that even though your wedding was grand and arranged entirely by the Grand Duke, don't you think he was a bit too domineering?" This vicious woman was clever. She knew that only by driving a wedge between the newlyweds could she find an opening as Parasati's mother. With a hint of tears, she pressed on. "The Grand Duke may be noble, but the way he handled things clearly shows he doesn't truly value you. Now that the wedding is over, I won't say much. But surely the proper gifts should still be given, shouldn't they?" At this point, her true intent was laid bare. Parasati calmly took a sip of tea without replying, "So that was why they had come today, to ask for money." The foolish younger sister shouted in the reception hall, "Sister, the side rooms are way too small that they're unlivable. Just let us return to the Count's estate, we won't interfere with Uncle. And your former fiancé doesn't seem to have forgotten you either." Those words stirred a storm within Parasati's heart. After her rebirth, she had done everything she could to break free from the three people who had killed her. Yet why did it still feel as if she were standing in the same place? Could it be that this so-called rebirth was nothing more than an abnormal illusion of her own, that she hadn't actually stopped anything at all? Panic seized Parasati. She thought, maybe I should just give them the money and make them leave. At that moment, the young masteress appeared. He trotted up to the malicious mother and daughter step by step, and spoke bluntly, "You're here to ask the Grand Duchess for money, aren't you?" Were those words just now meant to challenge the Grand Duke's authority? Then he turned, worry written all over his face, and walked up to Parasati. "Grand Duchess, are you all right? Good heavens, they've even made you break into a sweat." He suddenly spun back around and angrily questioned the two culprits. "What did you do to my mother?" Parasati's sister hurriedly protested, "We didn't do anything." Parasati's stepmother, however, looked down on the child before her. With a calm tone, she replied, "I'm merely here to visit my daughter." Us glared fiercely at the mother and daughter. His anger was almost visible, radiating from him like a small wolf baring its teeth to protect its owner. The sight put Parasati at ease, and she let out a long breath. Sensing her discomfort, Us thoughtfully suggested that they leave. Before they went, Us kept his eyes fixed on them, guarding against those malicious women approaching his mother again. Seeing this, gratitude filled Parasati's heart. When her former fiancé had caused trouble before, Us had protected her in the same way. She quickly stood up and bowed, offering him her sincere thanks. That genuine gratitude made Us blush, but he hurried to explain, "Sorry, I was rude, that I overheard your conversation nearby, and it seemed like the situation put you in a difficult spot." Mimicking his father, Us clasped his hands behind his back and spoke to Parasati like a little gentleman. If you're all right, shall I escort you back to your room? On the way back, Parasati still looked unsettled, unconsciously biting her nails. Us noticed immediately and smiled, trying to distract her. Did you know? The celebration will begin soon. The last war was won thanks to the Grand Duke arriving in time. I heard this celebration is meant to honor both the Grand Duke and the King, and that it will be grander than any before. Drawn in by his words, Parasati lowered her hand, and her anxiety slowly faded. The two chatted about the grand festival the Empire held every spring. Yet unease lingered in Parasati's heart, for in her previous life, it was during the festival that her stepmother had smothered her with a pillow. Us spoke in a low voice, saying that he actually disliked celebrations, because so many parents had lost their children during the war. Holding a celebration was one thing, but why did it have to be framed as commemorating a victory in war? Why would the king do that? Before he could finish, Parasati cut him off. Even inside the Grand Duke's residence, there were many ears around, and careless words could easily turn into rumors harmful to us. She glanced around, and only after confirming the corridor was empty did she relax. Smiling, she said, I understand what you mean. You said that because you didn't want me to feel sad, right? She then changed the subject up. By the way, is your room all settled? Did you get new furniture? Meeting her gaze, Us's face flushed red. Lowering his head, he replied it was the first time anyone had shown him such concern. My room is ready. Would you like to see it? His tone was no longer heavy, but filled with barely hidden anticipation and excitement. After hesitating for a moment, Us loosened his clenched fingers and added, and, from now on you can just call me Us. Parasati stared at him in surprise. She still remembered how, on her very first day in the residence, the child had clearly rejected her. Yet in just a few days the little wolf had turned into a timid puppy. Seeing Us blush all the way to his ears lifted Parasati's mood. She gently reached out and ruffled his soft hair. Us felt happy, but also confused. His father had never treated him this way. The heat on his face only grew stronger. Sweating, he protested, please don't do that. Why are you touching my head? With that, Us quickly ran off toward his room, needing a moment to calm himself down. Gazing out the corridor window, Parasati drifted into thought. This celebration was clearly not being held because of the Grand Duke's attendance. If it was meant to celebrate victory in war, then the king must have had another agenda. As her thoughts wandered, Us called out from inside the room, Grand Duchess, why haven't you come in yet? A man who was handsome and wealthy and loyal on top of that, how perfect would that be? The princess's love letters to him. He never even opened that, he simply threw them straight into the trash. The butler often complained that while the man was brilliant, his emotional intelligence was painfully low. Yet the same man turned around and asked about his wife's recent condition, leaving the butler staring at him in disbelief. Aren't you and the Grand Duchess only in a contract marriage? And yet you're actually concerned about her. That's truly unexpected. The man shot the butler an annoyed look. Was this old fox mocking him on purpose? The atmosphere instantly grew tense and the butler cleared his throat. To be honest, I was surprised when the Grand Duchess said she wanted to learn the estate's affairs. But she picked things up very quickly, already had a foundation, and her comprehension is excellent. As he poured tea for the Grand Duke, the butler continued his detailed report. Also, the Grand Duchess's family visited this morning. Remembering that Parasati had entered this contract marriage to escape her stepmother's control, the Grand Duke gave a cold order. From now on, even if they are her family, they are not to be let in. That unmistakably protective tone made the butler's heart stir. His master had always been distant to everyone, yet this time was different. Testing the waters, he asked, may I ask, will you still divorce her this time? The word divorce sharpened the man's gaze instantly. Even he himself didn't realize that upon hearing it, a dark aura of displeasure seeped from him. The butler, however, felt no fear, only quiet satisfaction. Drawing on his own experience, the butler reminded the Grand Duke, if you want others to believe you're a real married couple, the first thing to change is how you address each other. And don't stay cooped up in your office all the time. Recently, haven't you been spending time with the Grand Duchess? The Grand Duke fell silent. With a dark expression, he picked up the newspaper to change the subject, only to find an article unfavorable to Parasati printed right there. He let out an irritated sigh, then stood up and said to the butler, I understand. Also, have this article taken down. Under the butler's watchful gaze, he prepared to return to the bedroom to rest. Yet the rain outside left him inexplicably unsettled. just like the rain on the battlefield that day. Cold rain mixed with the blood of soldiers, soaking the Grand Duke's clothes. The slanted rain streaks resembled a sky filled with arrows. The pain buried deep in his memories made his head ache even more. Pressing a hand to his throbbing temple, he returned to the room. Strangely enough, the moment he saw Parasati sleeping so peacefully, the turmoil in his heart vanished at once. But when she showed signs of an uneasy nightmare, all that remained in him was concern. Seeing her sleep in such distress, the Grand Duke gently lifted her onto the bed, then carefully pulled the blanket over her abdomen. At that moment, the girl unconsciously grabbed the Grand Duke's clothes. Crying out for help, tears spilled from her tightly shut eyes, her body even trembling slightly. After hesitating for a moment, the Grand Duke reached out and gently placed his hand on her. Lowering his head, he said softly, "I'm here. No one will hurt you. Go to sleep." In her dreams, Parasati suddenly stopped crying, her breathing gradually calming. Accompanied by the soft patter of rain outside the window, she slept soundly through the rest of the night. But when she woke up the next morning, Parasati was shocked. Why was she in the bed? Touching the soft blanket, she even wondered if she had simply slept too deeply and imagined it all. Then she noticed the Grand Duke curled up on a chair nearby, and cold sweat broke out. Had she pushed him out of the bed last night? As she spiraled into her thoughts, the Grand Duke woke up and walked over to her bedside. Awake. Thinking he was about to scold her, Parasati immediately apologized. He offered no explanation, and the two went together to the dining table. Still embarrassed by what had just happened, Parasati wondered why he suddenly let her sleep in the bed, and even wanted to change how they addressed each other. Just thinking about it made her uncomfortable. At the table, the strongest human hatchling, Us, was solemnly staring down a carrot. At that moment, his guardian, Duke Theo, cleared his throat. For the first time, he asked for Us's opinion. "Since you're staying in Ducity now, would you like to attend the academy?" The three people at the table exchanged looks. The Grand Duke felt like a completely different person today. Us's eyes lit up as he looked at him. "I want to go." Thinking the child might be feeling pressured, the Grand Duke added kindly, "If you don't want to, we can drop it." Afraid he might change his mind, Us hurried to say he truly wanted to attend the academy. Sitting nearby, Parasati stared at the Grand Duke in shock. He had actually agreed. Just a day ago, he had insisted on sending Us to the countryside and keeping him isolated from everyone. Parasati had no idea this change was partly because of her. She assumed the butler had persuaded him. Us was just as confused. "Why did you suddenly agree? Didn't you say you'd never let me go to the academy?" The Grand Duke would never admit it was because of Parasati. With a serious expression, he explained, "In truth, I still feel the same. But you must eventually adapt to society, and as the heir of the family, you need to learn patience and restraint. That's why I agreed." Us rubbed his hands nervously, then finally voiced his concern. "But what if I hurt someone with my blood?" Seeing his unease, the kindly butler immediately reassured him. "Young master, just be careful not to get injured and carry hemostatic bandages with you." Parasati nodded seriously beside him. "Exactly. As there's no need to worry too much, but when you're angry, don't throw things anymore." Us flushed with embarrassment and stammered, I won't ever do that again." At last, under Us' hopeful gaze, the Grand Duke made the final decision. "Very well, it's settled." Us made a solemn promise I'll be extra careful, do my best, and won't draw any attention. Seeing how excited yet serious he looked, Parasati smiled with relief. She then glanced at the Grand Duke and curved her lips slightly. Was this his way of apologizing? A big tsundra and a little tsundra. Perhaps her approving gaze lingered too long, because the Grand Duke turned his head toward her, nearly causing Parasati to regret her own reaction. The noble Grand Duchess had assumed that, given her reputation, no one would volunteer to become her personal attendant. Yet a girl with cute freckles and twin ponytails stepped forward and bowed gracefully. "Greetings, Grand Duchess. My name is Rebecca. From today on, I will attend to you." Parasati responded gently, "You've come a long way. Thank you for your trouble." Rebecca was the daughter of a baron. Her family far from wealthy. Parasati had heard before that the Grand Duke planned to select attendants for her, but she hadn't expected anyone to actually sign up. She thought that even if someone wanted to work under the Grand Duke, they might not want this position. After all, the previous Grand Duchess had divorced less than 2 months after marriage. Parasati even wondered if the same might happen to her someday. Rebecca stole a glance at the elegant and beautiful Grand Duchess, then bowed again. "There's no need to be so formal, Your Grace." Parasati found the young maid quite likable. She nodded and asked softly, "Have you finished packing your belongings?" Rebecca smiled awkwardly that I don't have much luggage. She sincerely expressed her fondness for the Grand Ducal residence. The rooms here are wonderful and the sofas are incredibly soft. Parasati nodded hard to herself. She had been amazed by those sofas too. Resting her hand on the plush cushion, she smiled at Rebecca. "You should try sitting on the bed later as well." Facing a Grand Duchess with no airs at all, Rebecca's eyes filled with respect and admiration. "That it's such an honor to serve you that I thought they'd choose someone with better qualifications. I never dreamed I'd be selected." Once she started talking, Rebecca poured out praise non-stop, while Parasati sat on the sofa with a polite smile, thinking how lively the girl was. After a brief exchange and introductions, Parasati rose to attend to external matters. As her personal attendant, Rebecca followed along. Under the blazing sun, Parasati felt clearly dizzy and lightheaded. Since her rebirth, she had worked tirelessly, striving to do everything perfectly, yet fear of her family surged up once more. Now she understood she could no longer avoid it. She had to investigate the source of the curse that had killed her in her previous life. How hard was it to find even a single clue among stacks of books reaching the ceiling? It was no different from digging a potato out of solid earth with precision. Parasati lifted her head from the sea of books in despair. After all the trouble she'd taken to sneak into the temple to search for the curse that killed her before, the idea collapsed almost instantly. Her gaze shifted to the temple staff nearby instead. They had to know something, but how was she supposed to ask? In the eyes of others, this controversial new Grand Duchess had not only seduced the Grand Duke, but also kicked her own family out of the estate, an ultimate villainess, through and through. Now she was even asking about dark magic, making her seem even more wicked. But Parasati didn't care at all. Smiling sweetly, she held up a book that recorded curses and asked the priests about it. "Is this book an explanation of dark magic? Why would something like this exist in the temple? What if someone reads it and uses it to harm others?" She shook her head with righteous sorrow, an acting performance worthy of an Oscar. The priests panicked the moment they saw the sinister book. They hurriedly explained that curses were extremely ancient, sealed away more than 100 years ago, and could not simply be equated with dark magic. The temple kept such books only to prepare for possible future events, just like the heavenly punishment back then, which had been a curse cast by the gods themselves. Before the junior priest could finish speaking, someone beside him punched him hard, signaling him to shut up. But Parasati had already heard everything. Once again she put on a flawless performance, politely thanked the priests and left. Watching her retreating figure, the priests pressed their lips together in sympathy. It seemed the new Grand Duchess truly cared about the rumors surrounding the Lapalian family. Such a young and lovely girl, married into a cursed ducal house, worse still, the home of that war-crazed duke. She must be beaten every day, right? Everyone knew that this top-tier villainess had kicked her own family out on the very first day she rose to power, and now she was even asking around about curses that could kill without a trace. Truly reckless. The so-called demon from the rumors was running from one apothecary to another, asking if there was a poison that caused heart pain after drinking it. The shopkeepers stared at her like she was an idiot. "What poison doesn't hurt after you're poisoned?" Parasati walked down the street, exhausted. She knew her approach was foolish, but she had no other options left. Based on what the priest had said, she ruled out curses, leaving only poison. Holding her face in frustration, Parasati thought about it. The curse from her previous life felt eerily similar to the poison in the Grand Duke's blood. She had only experienced these two, and that was far too little. But she couldn't just ask the Grand Duke, "Have you ever sold your blood to poison people?" That would get her smashed on the spot. Suddenly, she remembered what the junior priest had said. Heavenly punishment was a curse bestowed by the gods. Then could the deadly poison in the Grand Duke's bloodline also be a form of heavenly punishment? Parasati shook her head violently. That thought was far too dangerous. If it were true, the temple would already be in ruins and she'd probably be reduced to bones for uncovering the fate of the ducal family. For the sake of her life, she'd better keep her mouth shut. What she didn't realize was that every dramatic shift in her expression had been fully observed by the guard standing beside her. He was originally one of the Grand Duke's elite knights, yet he had been assigned to serve as the Grand Duchess's personal guard. He cast her a displeased glance, unable to understand what kind of charm this so-called villainess had enough for the violent Grand Duke to say outright, "She is the most important person to me." The girl's delicate profile overlapped with the image of her from that rainy night, when she had nearly been buried alive yet still forced herself to stay strong. The guard looked away uneasily. So the Grand Duke wanted me to watch her every move. But the places this lady goes to are far too many and completely unrelated. He followed Parasati through large and small apothecaries across the city, only for her to stop in front of a taiyaki shop in the end. A knight skilled in tracking and reconnaissance was completely baffled this time. What exactly was she trying to do? Parasati's thoughts were simple. Since she'd gone out anyway, she might as well bring something back. Snacks for her nephew, us. When it was time to return to the estate, the young maid still hadn't come back. With the festival approaching, the streets were crowded, so she was likely stuck in traffic. The attendants suggested that Parasati return to the carriage first. But Parasati's gaze suddenly locked onto something ahead, her pupils shrinking in an instant. She sprinted forward without hesitation, even throwing her bag behind her. She grabbed the red-haired woman's arm and pulled her away from beneath the horse's hooves. Everything happened too fast. The two of them, faces pale with shock, crashed heavily onto the ground. The guards rushed over, anxiously asking if Parasati was hurt, but her eyes were fixed firmly on the red-haired woman. The woman turned out to be Parasati's sister-in-law, Lady Celsia. Yet Celsia seemed completely unresponsive, kneeling there in a daze, as the images of one adult and one child kept flashing before her eyes. This couldn't be. Even in 45-degree heat, she wore a high-neck sweater and thick gloves. She was born with a curse. Anyone who came into contact with her blood would die on the spot. To avoid harming others, she had no choice but to keep herself fully covered. She hid her fate with extreme care, married the man she loved, and gave birth to a son. But in the end, her husband still discovered the truth and left without a word, taking their child with him. Today on the street, she thought she saw her husband and son, and instinctively tried to chase after them, completely unaware of the danger right in front of her. If Parasati hadn't grabbed her in time, the two of them wouldn't have been thrown hard to the ground by the momentum. Everything happened so suddenly that only then did the guards behind Parasati arrive. It was at that moment Parasati realized the person she had saved was her own sister-in-law, Celsia. Celsia ignored the pain from her injuries and the stares of the crowd, desperately searching for her husband and son, only to realize it had all been an illusion. The noise around her grew louder, people whispering in shock. Why would a noblewoman suddenly rush in front of a carriage? Usually so strong and commanding, Celsia stood frozen, still trapped in the haze where her husband was no longer her husband, and her son no longer her son. Suddenly, a hat was placed over her head, covering her real face. Only then did Celsia snap back to her senses. Parasati was sweating with anxiety. "Are you all right?" The overwhelming noise that had felt like drowning in the sea slowly faded away. Celsia stood up, regaining her usual commanding presence. "What happened today? Tell no one." Parasati caught on immediately and put a finger to her lips toward the guards behind her. She stood there, stunned, watching Celsia's figure disappear into the distance. In the end, Parasati returned to the Duke's residence with her guard and young maid, all of them still chewing on taiyaki. Once back, the sharp-eyed housekeeper noticed that the hat on Parasati's head was gone. Even inside the residence, too many ears were listening. Keeping her promise, Parasati said lightly, My hat was blown away by the wind." It was a ridiculous excuse, and the housekeeper clearly didn't believe it. She sighed quietly. "I'll have the tailor make you another one." Parasati lowered her head and took a sip of tea to cover her reaction. The housekeeper might be cold in demeanor, but the tea she brewed was warm and soothing, easing Parasati's nerves. As soon as his stepmother returned, the boy ran straight to her. Suddenly, his smile froze. "Is your hand injured?" Parasati quickly hid the wound. "It's nothing. I just fell." "By the way, have you prepared everything you need for school?" Us nodded. Then, a little embarrassed, he asked, "On the first day, could you come with me?" He quickly added, "If you're busy, you don't have to." Seeing how careful he was, Parasati felt a pang in her chest and gently patted his head. "Sorry, I should have asked you that first. I'll go with you." Her touch made Us's face grow red, his eyes turning watery as if he were about to cry. To keep himself from tearing up, he hurriedly changed the subject. "What's that on the table?" Parasati smiled and explained, "I bought it for you. Sit down and eat." When it was time to turn in for the night, Parasati noticed that the Duke had been returning home earlier and earlier these days. Loosening his collar, the man asked tiredly, "I heard you saw my sister today." Parasati didn't know how to respond at first. Since Celsia didn't want anyone to know, she answered vaguely, "That we just ran into each other by chance." Thankfully, the Duke didn't press the matter. Watching his broad back, Parasati hesitated, then asked, "Will you go with us to enroll at the academy?" As expected, the Duke refused. Parasati tried to persuade him anyway. "I know you're busy, but I think it would be safer to go with someone familiar with the academy. You've been there before, right?" The man fell silent for a moment. "I've never been to the academy." Parasati widened her eyes in surprise. Did that mean he had never attended an academy? Was it because of the curse that he had private tutors instead? The Duke clearly didn't want to continue the topic and spoke up first. "Didn't you say you needed a lawyer? I'll find one for you, just wait." Parasati's mind fell into chaos. Having him find a lawyer was naturally better than doing it herself, but why was he doing this for her? She didn't know how to ask. In the end, she lowered her head and said softly, "Thank you." Watching the man turn away, something suddenly occurred to her. "Wait. You can sleep on the bed tonight." She had originally planned to accompany us to the academy today. But since Dio had already arranged a meeting with a lawyer, the plan fell through. This made Parasati feel deeply apologetic toward us. After leaving the law office, Parasati felt as though she hadn't understood anything at all. Without inheritance rights, a lawsuit could only be filed if one of three conditions was met. First, the will was forged. Second, the testament was made under secret coercion. Third, the count was killed by Parasati. None of these conditions applied, yet negative rumors about Parasati were spreading everywhere. No matter what, she had to stay prepared. Since marrying into the Duke's family, she had never directly responded to these accusations, but she knew she had a responsibility to clear her name. For now, she should go to the academy first. After waiting for quite some time, Parasati realized the carriage still hadn't arrived. The attendant explained that statues of the king and the duke were being installed nearby, drawing a large crowd. Because of that, the carriage had been delayed. Parasati suddenly felt a sense of familiarity. At that moment, a loud crash echoed. Everyone turned in panic. Parasati remembered. In her previous life, Shiv had once held her hand. He had brought her to this very place. And before her now lay a pile of rubble. Coming back to herself, Parasati stared at the stones. It was exactly the same as before, except this time Shiv was no longer by her side. As the statue shattered, countless newspapers drifted down from the air. What had just happened matched her memories without the slightest deviation. Returning to the past was not an illusion, and her death had not been a dream. Parasati felt as if she had awakened from a dream, her resolve growing firmer. She was not insane. Parasati lowered her gaze to the newspaper in her hands. The headline read, "The Grand Duchess abandoned a common knight for power and married the Duke." In her previous life, the papers had also attacked the Lapillion family. Only now, with Parasati as the Grand Duchess, the angle had changed. The ones behind this report were likely those same three people. Upon arriving at the academy and stepping down from the carriage, Parasati encountered an unexpected guest. It was the fourth princess, Leia. The sky was unusually clear, as if celebrating someone's imminent new beginning. This academy held great prestige in the capital. Besides royalty, children from noble families also studied here. Even so, she never expected to run into the fourth princess here. Early the next morning, Servia arrived and immediately pulled us into a tight embrace. As she turned her head, Servia noticed Parasati. Unlike her former aloofness, her attitude toward Parasati had clearly softened since the carriage incident. Us was especially enthusiastic toward Parasati. When he saw her, his eyes lit up and a bright smile spread across his face. Ever since returning from academy registration, Us had been isolated from the outside world. Although the term had begun, he still couldn't attend classes until he fully recovered. To stay by Us' side, the Duke ultimately brought his work back home. The doctor said Us only had a cold and that it wasn't serious, yet they insisted on keeping Parasati out of the room to prevent infection. Parasati couldn't understand why they were being so cautious. She didn't even see a maid attending him and had no idea whether Us could eat what he wanted. Taking advantage of a moment when no one was paying attention, Parasati quietly asked Us if there was anything he wanted to eat. Us replied in a low voice that he wanted strawberry cake. However, Dio noticed immediately and said coldly, "Your illness hasn't fully recovered yet." Parasati quickly offered her suggestion, "Let's take turns looking after Us. I miss him too." Dio rejected her firmly, "We still don't know the cause of his illness, so you can't take care of him.